The stagecoach rattled to a stop, dust billowing around its wheels as Winifred Keller clutched her single valise and peered anxiously out the window. Fort Stanton, New Mexico, looked nothing like the bustling Pennsylvania town she'd left behind. The year was 1878, and Winifred Winnie, to those who knew her well, had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met. "Last stop, Fort Stanton," called the driver, his voice rough from years of shouting over the clatter of hooves and wheels. Winnie smoothed her travel-wrinkled skirt and adjusted her bonnet before accepting the driver's hand to step down. At 22, she had made the boldest decision of her life by answering an advertisement placed by Franklin James, a cattle rancher who sought a bride to share his life on the frontier. "The James place is about 3 miles north," the driver informed her, pointing toward distant rolling hills. "Jeremiah at the general store usually knows when Frank's coming to town. You might want to check there first." "Thank you," Winnie replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her stomach. Clasping her valise in one hand and the carefully folded letter from Franklin James in the other, she made her way toward the dusty Main Street. Fort Stanton wasn't much to look at, a handful of buildings stretched along the main thoroughfare, with the promise of more development sprouting up in irregular patterns. A saloon, general store, small church, and what looked to be a blacksmith shop made up the heart of the settlement. Winnie strode toward the general store, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and an older man with an impressive mustache looked up from behind the counter. "Good afternoon, miss. New to Fort Stanton?" he asked, sizing her up with a curious but not unkind gaze. "Yes, sir. I'm Winifred Keller. I've come to marry Mr. Franklin James." She handed over the letter. "I believe you're Jeremiah. The stagecoach driver suggested I speak with you about finding Mr. James's ranch." The shopkeeper's eyebrows shot up as he read the letter. "Well, I'll be. Frank's bride has arrived." He handed the letter back with a strange look. "Madam, Frank wasn't expecting you for another 2 weeks. He's gone north to Cimarron on cattle business." Winnie felt the blood drain from her face. "But his last letter clearly stated I should arrive today. The 15th of May. Jeremiah shook his head. "There's been some confusion then. Frank left just 3 days ago, said he'd be back before the month's end." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "His ranch is still where it's always been, though. I can arrange for someone to take you out there if you'd like to wait for him." "Yes, that would be most appreciated," Winnie replied, struggling to maintain her composure. She had spent nearly every penny she had on the journey west. The prospect of waiting in a hotel for 2 weeks was impossible. "Thomas," Jeremiah called to a young boy sweeping the porch, "run and fetch Mrs. Hollister. Tell her we have a lady in need of assistance." Within half an hour, a sturdy wagon arrived outside the store, driven by a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "Martha Hollister," she introduced herself, offering a firm handshake. "Jeremiah tells me you're Frank James's mail-order bride." "Winifred Keller, yes," Winnie confirmed, still feeling rather unmoored. "Well, hop in, dear. We'll get you out to Frank's place. It's a fine house if a bit lonely. I'll help you get settled until he returns." The journey to the James Ranch took nearly an hour, with Martha filling the silence with stories about the area and its residents. Franklin James, she explained, had arrived 5 years earlier with nothing but determination and skill with cattle. He'd built his ranch from scratch and was now one of the more successful cattlemen in the territory. "He's a good man," Martha assured her. "Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but fair and honest. Folks respect him." As they crested a small hill, Winnie caught her first glimpse of what was to be her new home. A modest but well-built house stood on a gentle rise, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. A small creek wound its way past one side of the property, with cottonwoods providing welcome shade. "It's lovely," Winnie murmured, relief washing through her. At least the house looked solid and well-maintained, far better than the crude cabin she had feared might await her. Martha pulled the wagon to a stop near the front porch. "Let me help you inside. Frank keeps a spare key buried in that flower pot." Within moments, Winnie was standing in the main room of what was to be her new home. The house was surprisingly comfortable, with sturdy furniture, braided rugs on the plank floors, and curtains at the windows. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair placed invitingly before it. "He's done well for himself," Martha noted, watching Winnie take in her surroundings. "Kitchen's through there, bedroom and back. He added a second bedroom last year. I suppose he was already thinking of a family." Winnie blushed at the implication but couldn't deny the flutter of hope it inspired. "There's a hand that comes by to tend the livestock," Martha continued. "Miguel Ortiz. He'll be around in the morning, no doubt. He's reliable, been working for Frank for years." "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Hollister," Winnie said sincerely. "Martha, please." The older woman patted her hand. "I'll bring some supplies tomorrow, eggs, milk, that sort of thing. The pantry should be stocked with basics. Frank's not one to leave things to chance." After Martha departed, Winnie stood alone in the silent house, uncertain what to do first. Her intended husband was nowhere to be found, and she was essentially an intruder in his home. But she had nowhere else to go, and he had, after all, sent for her. Setting down her valise, she decided to make herself useful. A tour of the house revealed everything to be neat and orderly, if a bit dusty. The kitchen was well equipped, the pantry indeed stocked with flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. The second bedroom was small but featured a newly built bed frame, though without a mattress. As evening approached, Winnie lit a lamp and set about preparing a simple meal from the provisions she found. The act of cooking in what might become her kitchen brought a sense of calm. After eating, she washed the dishes and placed them carefully back where she had found them. Night fell across the New Mexico territory, stars emerging in a vast expanse, unlike anything she'd seen in Pennsylvania. Winnie changed into her nightgown and, after brief hesitation, slipped into Franklin James's bed. The sheets smelled faintly of soap and something distinctly masculine. As she drifted towards sleep, she wondered what sort of man she had traveled so far to marry, and what he would think when he returned to find her already installed in his home. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Winnie rose early, dressed in one of her better dresses, and set about cleaning the house. If she was to be an unexpected guest, she determined to earn her keep. As Martha had predicted, Miguel Ortiz arrived mid-morning to tend to the livestock. He seemed startled to find a woman in the house, but quickly recovered when Winnie explained who she was. "Senor James is a good man," he assured her, tipping his hat respectfully. "He will be pleased to find such a beautiful bride waiting." Winnie thanked him for the compliment, though inwardly she wondered if that would truly be the case. What if Franklin James was displeased to find her here ahead of schedule? What if, upon seeing her, he changed his mind entirely? Days passed in a rhythm of domestic tasks. Martha visited regularly, bringing supplies and company. Winnie learned to operate the pump in the yard, mastered the temperamental cookstove, and even gathered eggs from the small chicken coop behind the house. She cleaned every corner, aired out bedding, and mended torn curtains she found in a trunk. Each night, she scanned the horizon, wondering when her intended husband might appear. Their correspondence had been proper but warm, his letters revealing a thoughtful, intelligent man who sought a partner rather than merely a housekeeper. But letters could be deceiving. and Winnie had heard enough stories of mail-order brides finding themselves in untenable situations to harbor some anxiety. A week after her arrival, Winnie was hanging laundry on the line when she spotted a rider approaching from the north. Her heart leapt to her throat as she watched the man draw closer. He rode with the easy confidence of someone at home in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the afternoon sky. As he neared the house, he slowed his horse, clearly puzzled by the sight of laundry flapping in the breeze. When he spotted Winnie standing frozen by the clothesline, he pulled to a complete stop. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Franklin James, for surely this was him, was not what she had expected. Somehow, despite his detailed letters, she had imagined someone older, perhaps graying at the temples. Instead, the man before her appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-browned skin and dark hair visible beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, even at a distance, were strikingly blue. He dismounted in one fluid motion and approached slowly, as if afraid she might bolt like a startled deer. "Miss Keller?" he asked, his voice deeper than she had imagined while reading his letters. "Mr. James," she confirmed, suddenly acutely aware of her work-rumpled dress and hair escaping its pins. "You're early," he stated, though there was no accusation in his tone, merely surprise. "Your letter said the 15th, Winnie replied, fishing in her pocket for the folded paper she had kept close. He took it, scanning the contents with a furrowed brow. "Damn," he muttered, then immediately looked contrite. "Pardon my language, madam. I meant the 15th of June, not May." "I see the confusion now," he gestured to the house. "You've been here alone all this time. Mrs. Hollister has been very kind," Winnie assured him. "And Mr. Ortiz has tended to the animals. I hope you don't mind that I've made myself at home. I had nowhere else to go." Franklin studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to her astonishment, a slow smile spread across his face. "Well, Miss Keller, it seems I've come home to find my house in better condition than when I left it, and a bride already settled in. Some men might call that good fortune." Relief washed over Winnie. "Then you're not upset?" "Upset?" he laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I'm many things at this moment, Miss Keller, but upset isn't one of them." He removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair in need of a trim. "I should apologize for the confusion. The fault is entirely mine. Perhaps we might start again," Winnie suggested, extending her hand. "I'm Winifred Keller, though most call me Winnie." He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Franklin James, Frank to most." Instead of shaking her hand as expected, he lifted it to his lips in a gentle kiss that sent warmth flooding through her. "Welcome to my home, wife." The word hung in the air between them, presumptuous, perhaps, yet thrilling in its promise. "We're not married yet, Mr. James," Winnie reminded him softly, his blue eyes crinkled at the corners. "No, we're not, but I hope we soon will be if you find me acceptable." Winnie couldn't help but smile at his directness. "I believe we should become better acquainted before making such decisions, don't you think?" Frank nodded, releasing her hand reluctantly. "You're absolutely right. Forgive my presumption." He glanced toward the house. "Might I trouble you for some coffee?" "The trail was long, and I'd welcome a chance to wash off the dust before we talk." "Of course." Winnie gathered the remaining damp clothes into her basket. The water in the kitchen should still be hot. As Frank led his horse to the barn, Winnie hurried inside, suddenly nervous. The man whose house she had been living in for a week was now here in the flesh, and she would need to decide whether he was truly the husband she sought. By the time Frank entered the kitchen, freshly washed and in a clean shirt, Winnie had coffee brewing and a simple meal laid out: bread, cheese, and preserves she had found in the cellar. "You didn't need to go to any trouble," he said, though his appreciative glance at the food belied his words. "It's no trouble. Please sit." They shared the meal in surprisingly comfortable conversation. Frank told her about his cattle drive to Cimarron and the business that had kept him longer than expected. Winnie described her journey west and her impressions of Fort Stanton and the ranch. "And what do you think of New Mexico territory so far?" he asked, watching her closely. Winnie considered her answer. "It's wilder than I expected. Beautiful in a stark way that Pennsylvania never was. The sky seems enormous here." Frank nodded, pleased by her response. "It gets under your skin after a while. I can't imagine living anywhere else now. Your letters mentioned you came from Missouri originally, born and raised near Independence. Left after the war, too many bad memories. Wanted a fresh start." His expression clouded briefly. "Lost my parents and younger brother to the fighting." "I'm sorry," Winnie said softly, understanding his loss. "The war took my father as well." A moment of shared grief passed between them, creating an unexpected bond. "Your letters didn't mention how you came to answer a stranger's advertisement for a wife," Frank noted, changing the subject. "If you don't mind my asking." Winnie traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "My mother died last winter. There was little left for me in Harrisburg after that. I worked as a school teacher, but—" She hesitated. "There were complications." Frank waited, not pressing but clearly interested. "The school superintendent's son developed an inappropriate attachment to me," she finally explained. "When I rejected his advances, his father made my position untenable. Your advertisement seemed like Providence, a chance for a new beginning." Frank's expression darkened. The man should have been horsewhipped, when he couldn't help but smile at his indignation on her behalf. "Perhaps. But had things been different, I wouldn't be here now." "And are you glad to be here, Miss Keller? Now that you've seen the place and met the man who wrote to you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Winnie met his gaze steadily. "I believe I could be happy here, Mr. James. But as I said, we should take time to know one another properly before making permanent decisions." Frank nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "That's fair. I suggest a compromise. Stay as my guest for 2 weeks. If at the end of that time you find me suitable as a husband, we'll marry. If not, I'll pay for your return journey to Pennsylvania or anywhere else you might wish to go. And my accommodation during this trial period. You may keep the main bedroom. I'll sleep in the bunkhouse until matters are settled between us." It was a generous offer, and Winnie recognized it as such. "Very well, Mr. James. 2 weeks." Frank smiled, extending his hand to seal their agreement. As their fingers met, Winnie felt a flutter of something promising. Despite the confusion of her arrival, she had a feeling that Franklin James might indeed be the husband she had hoped to find. The next 2 weeks unfolded in a pattern of shared work and gradually increasing familiarity. True to his word, Frank slept in the small bunkhouse near the barn, giving Winnie the privacy of the main house. Each morning, they breakfasted together before attending to their respective duties, Frank to his cattle and ranch work, Winnie to the household tasks. In the evenings, they shared supper and conversation, learning about each other's lives and dreams. Frank spoke of his plans to expand the ranch, perhaps adding sheep to his cattle operation. Winnie told him of her love of teaching and her hope to perhaps start a small school for the children of neighboring ranches, once they were properly settled. "You'd make a fine teacher," Frank commented one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. "There's certainly need for education out here." "I've always believed that knowledge is the greatest gift we can give children," Winnie replied, warming to the subject. "Especially in places like this, where opportunities might otherwise be limited." Frank's gaze was thoughtful. You know, there's a room above the stable that could be converted to a classroom. It would need work, but with some windows cut in and proper desks. He trailed off, seemingly embarrassed by his enthusiasm. That is, if you decided to stay, of course. Winnie felt her heart warm at his consideration of her wishes. In their correspondence, Frank had mentioned wanting children of their own, but he had never discussed her desire to continue teaching. That he would think of it now, without prompting, spoke volumes about the kind of partner he might be. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Their eyes met in the fading light, and something shifted between them, a recognition of shared purpose that went beyond the practical arrangement they had initially discussed. The next day, Frank took Winnie on a tour of the entire ranch, proudly showing her the herds of cattle grazing on the rolling grasslands, the creek that never ran dry even in the hottest summers, and the grove of fruit trees he had planted his second year that were just now beginning to bear. "It's wonderful," Winnie said sincerely as they paused on a ridgeline overlooking the property. "You've built something truly impressive here, Frank." It was the first time she had used his given name, and he noticed, his eyes crinkling with pleasure. "It was lonely work," he admitted. "Worth it, but lonely. That's why I finally wrote that advertisement." He looked slightly embarrassed. "I never expected someone like you to answer." "Someone like me," Frank gestured vaguely. "Educated, refined, beautiful." The compliment brought heat to Winnie's cheeks. "I'm hardly refined, Frank. Just a schoolteacher from Pennsylvania." "You're more than that," he countered softly. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Frank cleared his throat and pointed to a distant ridge. "That marks the northern boundary of the ranch. I'm hoping to purchase the adjacent property next year if the Wilsons decide to sell." The subject changed, but something had been acknowledged between them, a mutual attraction that went beyond their practical arrangement. That evening, as they prepared supper together, Frank proving surprisingly adept in the kitchen, Winnie found herself watching his hands. They were strong, calloused from hard work, yet gentle when passing her plates or reaching for ingredients. She found herself wondering how those hands might feel against her skin, and immediately chastised herself for such forward thoughts. "You're quiet tonight," Frank observed as they washed dishes side by side afterward. "Just thinking," Winnie replied evasively, "about whether you'll stay." His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught the tension in his shoulders. "Actually, I think I've made my decision on that matter," she said, setting down the plate she had been drying. Frank stilled, his eyes meeting hers with cautious hope. "And? I would like to stay, Frank. I would like to be your wife." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Frank's expression shifted from hope to joy in an instant. He reached for her hands, water still dripping from his fingers. "Are you certain, Winnie? I don't want you to feel obligated because of the situation." "I'm certain," she confirmed. "This past week has shown me the kind of man you are: honest, hardworking, kind. The sort of man I hoped to find when I answered your advertisement." Frank's smile was radiant. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory." He hesitated, then added, "I should tell you something, though, something I didn't mention in my letters." Winnie felt a flicker of apprehension. "What is it?" "My name isn't just Franklin James. It's Franklin James Jackson. I started using just the first two names when I came west." "Less of a mouthful, I suppose." Relief washed through her. "That's your big secret? A third name?" Frank laughed sheepishly. "Well, it seemed important to mention before we marry. I wouldn't want you feeling deceived when the preacher uses my full name." Winnie squeezed his hands. "Franklin James Jackson, I accept your proposal of marriage." His eyes darkened, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to each one. We'll ride into Fort Stanton tomorrow, speak with the preacher. Unless you want a long engagement. I think we've had quite enough waiting, Winnie replied with a small smile. Tomorrow would be perfect. The following day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of their decision. They rode to Fort Stanton together, Frank on his stallion and Winnie on a gentle mare he kept for occasional guests. The ride gave Winnie time to appreciate the man who would soon be her husband, the straight set of his shoulders, the confident way he handled his horse, the occasional glances he cast her way, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Reverend Thompson at the small church in Fort Stanton was delighted to perform the ceremony. "I've been wondering when Frank would find himself a bride," he confided to Winnie while Frank arranged for the marriage license at the town's small administrative office. "He's one of the good ones, my dear. You've chosen well." "I believe he chose me, Reverend," Winnie replied with a smile. "Perhaps, but you had the wisdom to accept." The older man patted her hand kindly. "We can perform the ceremony this Sunday after services if that suits. Give folks a chance to attend if they wish." Winnie looked to Frank as he rejoined them. He nodded his agreement. "Sunday would be fine, Reverend. Thank you." After leaving the church, Frank took Winnie to the general store. "We should get you a proper ring," he explained as they entered. "And anything else you might need." Jeremiah greeted them warmly, clearly pleased by the news of their impending marriage. "About time you settled down, Frank. This young lady had quite the adventure arriving early." "A fortunate mistake," Frank replied, his hand resting lightly on the small of Winnie's back. The casual touch sent a pleasant warmth through her. The selection of rings was limited, but Winnie found a simple gold band that fit perfectly. Frank insisted on adding a small brooch with a pearl at its center to match your name, he explained. "Winnie comes from the Welsh for fair, blessed, white, doesn't it?" Winnie was touched that he knew the origin of her name. "It does. My mother was Welsh on her side." They left the store with their purchases and a promise from Jeremiah to spread word of the wedding. "Though Martha Hollister's probably told half the county already," he added with a chuckle. On the ride back to the ranch, they stopped by a small creek for a simple picnic lunch that Winnie had packed. Seated on a blanket beneath the shade of a cottonwood, with the sound of water flowing nearby, Winnie felt a sense of rightness settle over her. "I never expected to find happiness again after my mother died," she admitted softly. "Certainly not all the way out here in New Mexico territory." Frank reached over to take her hand, "And I never expected a mix-up in dates to bring me the perfect wife weeks early." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find this all a dream." "Not a dream," Winnie assured him, gathering her courage to lean forward and press a soft kiss to his cheek, "though perhaps a bit like fate." Frank turned his head slightly, their faces now inches apart. "May I?" he whispered, his eyes dropping to her lips. Winnie nodded, her heart racing as Frank closed the distance between them. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft against hers, the kiss gentle and questioning at first, then more assured as she responded. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and Winnie found herself leaning into his touch, her own hands resting against the solid warmth of his chest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Frank rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you hanging laundry in my yard," he confessed. Winnie laughed softly. "Hardly the most romantic first impression." "You looked like you belonged there," he countered. "Like a dream I'd never dared to wish for." The days before the wedding passed in a flurry of preparation. Martha Hollister and several other women from neighboring ranches arrived to help, bringing food and offers of assistance. Winnie was touched by their welcome, having feared she might be viewed as an outsider for years to come. "Nonsense," Martha declared when Winnie expressed this concern. "Frank's well respected, and any woman with sense enough to marry him is welcome here. Besides, we've been trying to marry him off for years. You've saved us a lot of matchmaking effort." The women helped Winnie prepare her best dress for the ceremony and insisted on decorating the small church with wildflowers gathered from the surrounding hills. There would be a celebration afterward at the ranch, with food and music and dancing that might last well into the night. "It's how we do things out here," explained Eleanor Wilson, whose ranch bordered Frank's property to the north. "Any excuse for a gathering, especially a happy one." On Sunday morning, Winnie woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. She dressed carefully in her blue silk dress, the finest she owned, and arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style, adorned with small white flowers that Martha had brought. Frank had spent the night at the bunkhouse, adhering to tradition even though they had already been living on the same property for weeks. He would ride to the church separately, while Martha and her husband would escort Winnie. The church was fuller than Winnie had expected, with ranchers and townspeople alike filling the simple wooden pews. As Martha led her to the back of the church to wait for the ceremony to begin, Winnie caught sight of Frank standing at the altar. He had traded his usual work clothes for a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. When he turned and saw her, his face transformed with a smile so genuine it made her heart skip. Reverend Thompson nodded to the small gathering of musicians, a fiddler, guitarist, and accordion player, who began a simple but beautiful melody. With Martha's husband offering his arm, Winnie walked slowly down the aisle, her eyes never leaving Frank's. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They exchanged traditional vows, promises to love, honor, and cherish each other through all of life's joys and hardships. When Frank slipped the gold band onto her finger, his hand trembled slightly, and Winnie felt a surge of tenderness at this evidence of his emotion. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson declared, beaming at them both. "Franklin, you may kiss your bride." Frank's kiss was gentle but held a promise of deeper passion to come, when they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Franklin Jackson. The applause and cheers were heartfelt and enthusiastic. The celebration at the ranch lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by neighbors. The musicians played lively tunes that had people dancing despite the warm May afternoon. Winnie was introduced to so many people that she feared she would never remember all their names, but everyone welcomed her warmly. "You've brought light back to Frank's eyes," Miguel Ortiz told her as they shared a quiet moment while Frank was deep in conversation with some of the other ranchers. "He has been a good employer, a fair man, but always there was a sadness in him. Now it is gone." As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the continuing festivities. Frank found Winnie sitting at one of the tables, watching the dancers. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, offering his hand with a smile. "Would you do me the honor?" "I'd be delighted, Mr. Jackson," she replied, allowing him to lead her to the area where others were dancing to a waltz. Frank's arm around her waist was strong and secure as he guided her through the steps. "Are you happy, Winnie?" he asked softly, his eyes searching hers. "Completely," she assured him, meaning it with all her heart. "Though I must confess to some nervousness about tonight." A flush crept up Frank's neck at her forthright reference to the wedding night ahead. "We'll take things as slowly as you need," he promised. "I would never rush you." The tenderness in his voice eased her anxiety. "Thank you," she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder as they continued to dance. Eventually, as the hour grew late, guests began to depart with final congratulations and good wishes. Martha and several other women helped clean up the remains of the feast, waving away Winnie's offers to assist. "Not on your wedding night, dear," Martha insisted with a knowing smile. "You have other matters to attend to." Alone at last, Frank and Winnie stood somewhat awkwardly in the main room of what was now truly their shared home. "Would you like some tea?" Frank offered, clearly trying to put her at ease. Winnie smiled at the gesture. "That would be lovely." While Frank busied himself in the kitchen, Winnie slipped into the bedroom to change into the nightgown she had carefully prepared, simple, but made of fine cotton, with delicate embroidery at the neckline. She brushed out her hair until it fell in waves down her back, then took a deep breath to steady her nerves before returning to the main room. Frank had removed his jacket and tie and was pouring tea into 2 cups. He looked up as she entered, and the cup in his hand tilted dangerously before he caught himself. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Thank you." Winnie accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The simple touch seemed charged with new meaning now that they were husband and wife. They sat before the fire, talking quietly about the wedding and their guests, the conversation a gentle prelude to the intimacy that would follow. When Winnie set down her empty cup, Frank took her hand. "We don't have to rush anything," he reminded her softly. "We have all the time in the world." Winnie reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I want to be your wife in every way, Frank. I'm nervous, yes, but not afraid." The look he gave her was full of such tenderness that it brought tears to her eyes. He stood, drawing her to her feet, and led her to the bedroom, their bedroom now. What followed was a gentle initiation into the physical aspects of marriage. Frank was patient and considerate, guiding her with words and touches until nervousness gave way to pleasure. Their union was both a culmination of the promises they had made and a beginning of something deeper, a true marriage of body, heart, and mind. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms with her head pillowed on his chest, Winnie felt a profound sense of peace. "I never expected this," she murmured. "What's that?" Frank asked, his fingers threading through her hair, "to feel so complete, so at home." She propped herself up to look at him in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. "When I stepped off that stagecoach and found your house empty, I thought I had made a terrible mistake. Now I know it was the best decision of my life." Frank pulled her down for a tender kiss. "The moment I rode home and saw you there, I knew. Somehow I just knew you were meant to be my wife." He smiled against her lips. "Even if you did arrive a month early." "A fortunate mistake," Winnie echoed his earlier words, settling back against him with a contented sigh. Outside, the vast New Mexico sky sparkled with stars, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage through the open window. Inside, in the home they now truly shared, Winifred and Franklin Jackson began their life together, a union born of practical arrangement, but transformed by genuine love into something far more precious. The months following their wedding unfolded with a gentle rhythm of shared work and growing intimacy. Summer arrived in earnest, bringing long, hot days that had Frank and his hands working from dawn to dusk, managing the cattle herds and tending to the endless tasks required to keep the ranch functioning. Winnie settled into her role as the ranch mistress with natural grace. She managed the household efficiently, established a productive vegetable garden, and even began assisting with the ranch accounts, discovering that Frank, for all his practical skills, had little patience for bookkeeping. "You're saving me hours of frustration," he told her one evening as she organized his haphazard records into a proper ledger. "I've been meaning to hire someone from town to sort through all this." "It's actually quite satisfying," Winnie replied, smiling at his relieved expression. Numbers have a certainty to them that's comforting. Everything balances in the end if you're careful. Frank came to stand behind her chair, his hands resting on her shoulders. You're a wonder, Mrs. Jackson. I don't know how I managed before you arrived. Poorly, judging by these accounts, she teased, leaning back against him. He laughed and bent to kiss her neck, a casual intimacy that still sent shivers through her. Their physical relationship had blossomed in the weeks since their wedding, initial hesitance giving way to mutual passion that sometimes left Winnie breathless with wonder. As July turned to August, bringing even more intense heat, Winnie began to suspect a new development. Her monthly cycle, always regular as clockwork, failed to appear. At first, she said nothing, not wanting to raise hopes that might prove false. But when a second month passed with the same result, accompanied by morning fatigue and a curious sensitivity to certain smells, she could no longer deny the likelihood. She chose a quiet evening to share her suspicions after they had finished supper and moved to the porch to enjoy the cooler air of twilight. Frank sat in his usual chair, pipe in hand, watching the sunset paint the distant hills with golden light. "Frank," Winnie began, suddenly nervous despite their closeness. "I believe I may have news." He turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "What sort of news?" Winnie placed a hand over her still flat stomach, a gesture that spoke volumes. "The sort that might arrive in about 7 months' time." For a moment, Frank simply stared, his expression blank with shock. Then understanding dawned and the pipe slipped from his fingers to clatter on the porch floor. "Winnie," he breathed, rising from his chair to kneel before hers. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" She nodded, emotion making speech difficult. "I believe we're going to have a child." Frank's face transformed with joy. He gathered her hands in his, pressing fervent kisses to her fingers. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." The awe in his voice brought tears to Winnie's eyes. "You're pleased then?" "Pleased," Frank laughed, the sound ringing with happiness. "I'm overjoyed." He placed a gentle hand over hers on her stomach. "Is everything? Are you feeling well?" "A little tired in the mornings and certain foods seem suddenly unappealing, but otherwise I feel perfectly fine," Winnie assured him. "It's early days yet." Frank nodded, his expression turning serious. "We should send for the doctor in Fort Stanton. Make sure you have proper care." "There's plenty of time for that," Winnie said, touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, many under far less comfortable circumstances than ours." "Still," Frank insisted, "I want everything to be right for you and the little one." He looked up at her with such love that it made her heart ache. "I never thought I could be this happy, Winnie. You've given me more than I ever dreamed possible." That night, as they lay together in their bed, Frank held her with a new gentleness, his hand resting protectively over her abdomen as if already shielding their unborn child. "I'll build a proper cradle," he murmured against her hair. "Oak, I think. Sturdy enough to last for all the children we might have." Winnie smiled in the darkness, her hand covering his. "How many children are you planning, Mr. Jackson?" "As many as you're willing to give me, Mrs. Jackson," he replied, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "Though I'd be perfectly content with this one, if that's how things unfold." His willingness to leave such decisions in her hands only deepened Winnie's love for him. So many men, she knew, viewed their wives merely as vessels for continuing the family line, with little regard for the toll frequent childbearing might take. That Frank considered her wishes in the matter was yet another confirmation that she had found a truly exceptional husband. Word of Winnie's pregnancy spread quickly through the small community. Martha Hollister was the first to visit with congratulations and practical advice. "First babies are special," she declared, presenting Winnie with a beautifully knitted blanket. I started this when you and Frank married. Call it an old woman's intuition. Leaner Wilson arrived the following day with a basket of preserves and a small sack of herbs. For morning sickness, she explained. Make a tea with just a pinch. Works wonders. Even Miguel Ortiz's wife, Sophia, who rarely left their small homestead, came to offer congratulations and promises to help when the time came. I have delivered many babies, she told Winnie in her heavily accented English. My mother was a midwife in Mexico. I will be here when your time comes. The outpouring of support touched Winnie deeply. She had worried about facing childbirth so far from her own mother and the familiar surroundings of Pennsylvania. The kindness of these frontier women reassured her that she would not be alone. Frank, meanwhile, threw himself into preparations with characteristic thoroughness. True to his word, he began crafting a cradle of seasoned oak in the evenings, working by lamplight in the small workshop attached to the barn. He also embarked on an expansion of the house, adding a proper nursery adjoining their bedroom. The baby won't need it for a while, Winnie pointed out as he marked out the dimensions. Infants usually sleep in their parents' room for the first months. I'm planning for the future, Frank replied with a smile. Besides, it gives me something to do with my hands, keeps me from fretting too much. Winnie laughed at his admission. Are you fretting, Frank Jackson, you who face down stampeding cattle without blinking an eye? He pulled her into a gentle embrace. This is different. This matters more than anything has ever mattered. As autumn approached, bringing welcome relief from the summer heat, Winnie's condition became more pronounced. Her slender frame now showed a definite roundness that no amount of clever dressmaking could disguise. Frank watched the changes in her body with wonder, and occasionally, Winnie noticed, with a certain masculine pride. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, he told her one evening as she brushed her hair before bed, her nightgown outlining her growing belly. Winnie made a face at him in the mirror. I'm as ungainly as one of your heifers. Frank moved behind her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. Not to me, he said simply. To me, you're perfect. His hands slid down to cup her belly, where their child grew stronger each day. As if in response to its father's touch, the baby kicked a strong, definite movement that made Winnie gasp in surprise. What is it? Frank asked, alarmed. Are you in pain? No, Winnie assured him, placing her hand over his. The baby moved. Here, wait. They stood together in silence until the movement came again, a distinct nudge against Frank's palm. His expression of absolute wonder was something Winnie knew she would remember all her days. That's our child, he whispered, awestruck. Actually moving. Becoming more real every day, Winnie agreed softly. The first snow fell in early December, transforming the ranch into a winter wonderland. Frank worked tirelessly to ensure the cattle had adequate shelter and feed for the cold months ahead. Winnie, now in her 7th month, found herself increasingly confined to the house as Frank insisted she avoid any risk of slipping on ice or overtaxing herself. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she reminded him when he objected to her carrying a basket of laundry. Humor me, he replied, taking the basket from her hands. I promise to cherish you, remember. Let me do that in my own way. It was difficult to argue with such sincere concern, though Winnie sometimes chafed at the restrictions. To keep herself occupied, she turned her attention to preparing for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny garments, organizing the nursery that Frank had finished just before the first snowfall, and reading the medical book that Dr. Haverston from Fort Stanton had loaned her during his visit to check on her progress. Everything looks to be proceeding normally, the doctor had assured them both. The baby is well positioned, and Mrs. Jackson is in excellent health. I see no reason to expect anything but a routine delivery." His words had eased some of Frank's anxiety, though Winnie noticed her husband still kept a closer eye on the weather, clearly concerned about the possibility of being cut off from medical help when her time came. Christmas arrived with a brief break in the winter storms. Neighbors gathered at the church in Fort Stanton for services and celebration, many bringing gifts for the impending new arrival at the Jackson Ranch. "This little one will be the most outfitted baby in the territory," Frank joked as they drove home in the sleigh, the back piled with wrapped packages containing everything from handmade quilts to tiny moccasins crafted by a Mescalero Apache woman who occasionally traded with the settlers. "It's their way of welcoming our child into the community," Winnie said, nestled against Frank's side beneath thick buffalo robes. "I never expected such generosity." "People look out for each other out here," Frank replied. "They've welcomed you as one of their own. Our child will be born into a community that cares." The new year of 1879 arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow that effectively isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. Frank ventured out daily to tend to the livestock, but insisted that Miguel stay in the small cabin near the main house rather than returning to his own home, ensuring additional help was close at hand should Winnie need it. January gave way to February, and Winnie's due date approached. The baby had dropped lower, making breathing easier but walking increasingly uncomfortable. Nights were often restless, no position providing comfort for long. Frank took to sleeping lightly, waking at her smallest movement to ask if she needed anything. His constant attentiveness might have been annoying had it not been so clearly born of love. "You need your rest too," Winnie reminded him one night after he had risen for the third time to bring her water and adjust her pillows. "You'll be no use to me or the baby if you're exhausted." "I'll sleep when the baby's safely here," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead before returning to his side of the bed. The pains began in the early hours of a cold February morning. Winnie woke to a cramping sensation that wrapped around her lower back and tightened across her abdomen. She lay still, counting the minutes between occurrences, not wanting to wake Frank until she was certain this was truly the beginning of labor. After an hour of increasingly regular contractions, she gently shook his shoulder. "Frank, it's time." He was instantly alert, sitting up and lighting the bedside lamp. "Are you sure? How far apart are the pains?" "About 10 minutes now, regular and getting stronger." Winnie managed a smile despite her discomfort. "I think our baby has decided to join us today." Frank was out of bed in an instant, pulling on clothes and boots. "I'll send Miguel for Sophia and Martha. Dr. Haverston too, if the pass is clear enough for him to get through." "There's time," Winnie assured him, easing herself to a sitting position. First babies typically take their time arriving. Despite her calm words, she was grateful for Frank's efficiency. Within minutes, Miguel was riding toward the Ortiz homestead, and Frank had stoked the fire in the main room and put water on to boil. Sophia Ortiz arrived first, her capable presence immediately bringing a sense of order to the proceedings. She examined Winnie briefly and nodded in satisfaction. "The baby is well positioned," she confirmed. "But as you said, there is still time. We will walk a little, yes." Movement helps the baby find its way. For the next several hours, Winnie alternated between walking slowly around the house, leaning on Frank's arm, and resting in the rocking chair when the contractions intensified. Martha arrived mid-morning, bringing additional linens and her own calm competence to add to Sophia's. By early afternoon, the contractions were coming closer together, and Winnie found herself unable to talk through them. Sophia and Martha exchanged glances and began preparing the bedroom in earnest, laying down protective cloths, arranging clean linens, and setting out the supplies they would need. "It is time for the men to wait outside," Sophia announced as Winnie gasped through a particularly strong contraction. "Frank, you have done well, but now this is women's work." Frank looked stricken at the thought of leaving Winnie's side. "I want to stay with her." "No, my friend," Sophia said firmly. "You will wait with Miguel. We will call if you are needed." Winnie reached for his hand. "It's all right, Frank. I'm in good hands." She managed a weak smile. "Go, this part isn't something you need to witness." He bent to kiss her forehead, his eyes conveying everything words could not. "I love you, Winnie Jackson, more than life itself." "I love you too," she whispered. "Now go, before Sophia throws you out bodily." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and focused effort for Winnie. Sophia proved to be as skilled as she had claimed, guiding her through the increasingly difficult contractions with firm instructions and gentle encouragement. Martha supported her from behind, providing counterpressure against her back when the pains were most intense. Outside, Frank paced the porch, deaf to Miguel's attempts at distraction. Each cry that filtered through the closed doors was like a physical blow. He had faced dangers of many kinds in his life: Civil War battles, cattle rustlers, the unpredictable fury of nature itself, but nothing had prepared him for the helplessness of this moment, knowing that Winnie was suffering and he could do nothing to ease her pain. As dusk began to fall, the cries from within the house changed in character, becoming more urgent, more purposeful. Then, suddenly, a new sound pierced the gathering twilight, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Frank froze in place, his heart seemingly stopped in his chest. The baby's cry continued, strong, insistent, gloriously alive. He turned toward the door, every muscle tensed as he waited for word. It came several minutes later when Martha emerged, her face tired but wreathed in a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Jackson, you have a healthy son." A son. Frank felt his knees weaken slightly. "And Winnie?" he managed to ask, his voice barely audible. "Tired but well," Martha assured him. "Sophia is just getting her settled. You can go in shortly." Frank nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. A son. He had a son. And Winnie was safe. Nothing else in the world mattered in that moment. When he was finally allowed to enter the bedroom, the sight that greeted him would remain etched in his memory forever. Winnie, pale but radiant, propped against pillows with a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile tremulous but full of joy. "Come meet your son, Frank," she said softly. He approached the bed almost reverently, perching carefully on its edge to peer at the tiny face visible among the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair, still damp from birth, and the reddened complexion of all newborns. As Frank watched in wonder, the infant opened his eyes, dark blue and unfocused, but unmistakably alert. "He's perfect," Frank whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch his son's tiny hand. To his amazement, the baby's fingers curled reflexively around his, gripping with surprising strength. "Strong, too." "Like his father," Winnie said, her voice thick with emotion. Frank looked up from his son's face to his wife's, overwhelmed by the love he felt for them both. "You are magnificent," he told her, leaning forward to press his lips gently to hers. "Thank you for our son." "What shall we call him?" Winnie asked, adjusting the baby as he began to fuss slightly. Frank considered the question seriously. "What about William, after your father?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but had never settled definitively on choices for either gender. Winnie's eyes filled with tears at the suggestion. "William Franklin Jackson," she said, testing the name. The baby seemed to quiet at the sound. "I think he approves." "William it is, then," Frank agreed, his heart so full it seemed impossible his chest could contain it. Sophia and Martha discreetly left the new family alone, promising to return in the morning to check on mother and child. As darkness fell completely outside, Frank built up the fire and lit lamps around the room, creating a warm cocoon of light against the winter night. When Winnie began to show signs of exhaustion, Frank gently took the baby from her arms. "Rest," he urged her. "I'll watch over him." Too tired to argue, Winnie settled more comfortably against the pillows, her eyes already closing. "Wake me when he needs to feed." "I will," Frank promised, cradling his son against his chest as he settled into the rocking chair near the bed. Alone with his sleeping wife and newborn son, Frank felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a mail-order bride advertisement and continued with Winnie's unexpected early arrival at his empty house had led to this perfect moment. His family, the family he had hardly dared to hope for after losing everyone during the war years, was now a reality. William stirred in his arms, tiny face scrunching momentarily before relaxing back into sleep. Frank touched a gentle finger to his son's cheek, marveling at the impossibly soft skin. "Welcome to the world, William Franklin Jackson," he whispered. "Your mother and I have been waiting for you." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Jackson family. William grew from a demanding infant into a sturdy toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's thoughtful gray eyes. He showed an early affinity for animals, toddling after Frank whenever possible and watching with solemn concentration as his father went about the daily tasks of ranch life. True to her original ambition, Winnie converted the room above the stable into a small schoolroom and began teaching the children from neighboring ranches 3 days a week. Her reputation as an excellent teacher spread quickly, and soon families were bringing children from as far as 15 miles away for the opportunity to learn from Mrs. Jackson. Frank expanded the ranch operations gradually, adding sheep as he had planned and purchasing the Wilson property when Alina's husband died unexpectedly in the winter of 1880. He built a larger barn and additional corrals, hired more hands to manage the growing herds, and became known throughout the territory as a fair employer and shrewd businessman. In the spring of 1881, their family expanded again with the arrival of a daughter, Margaret Rose, named for both grandmothers. Maggie, as she was quickly nicknamed, had her mother's fair coloring and a determined personality that manifested from her earliest days. "She knows what she wants," Frank observed with amused pride as the infant girl refused to settle for anyone but her mother when hungry. "Heaven help us when she gets older." William, now a solemn 2-year-old, regarded his baby sister with cautious interest. "Mine?" he asked, pointing to the bundle in Winnie's arms. "Yes, sweetheart," Winnie assured him, making space beside her for William to climb up and see the baby more closely. "This is your sister, Maggie. You're her big brother." William considered this information seriously before nodding his acceptance. "We'll take care," he announced, patting the baby's blanket gently. Frank, watching from the doorway, felt his heart swell with pride. "That's right, son. We all take care of each other. That's what families do." As Fort Stanton and the surrounding area grew more settled, the Jackson Ranch became something of a gathering place for the community. Frank built a larger dining room onto the house to accommodate the frequent Sunday dinners that brought neighbors together for food and companionship. Winnie's school expanded to include adult education classes in the evenings, teaching reading and basic arithmetic to ranch hands and settlers who had missed such opportunities in their youth. In 1883, they welcomed their third child, another boy they named Thomas, after Frank's father. Tommy was a cheerful baby with an infectious laugh that delighted his older siblings. William, now a serious 4-year-old who had recently begun helping with simple chores, took his role as eldest brother very seriously, while 3-year-old Maggie alternated between treating the baby like her personal doll and ignoring him completely when more interesting activities beckoned. Life settled into a pattern of seasonal rhythms: calving and lambing in the spring, cattle drives to railheads in summer, harvest in the fall, and the quieter but no less busy winter months when attention turned to repairs, planning, and indoor projects. Through it all, Frank and Winnie's partnership deepened, their love for each other strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life?" Frank asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. William was constructing an elaborate fort from sticks, directing Maggie with the air of a general commanding troops, while Tommy toddled after them both, determined to be included. Winnie leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Never. When I stepped off that stagecoach 5 years ago, I was just hoping for safety and security." She turned to look at him, her eyes soft with memory. "I never dreamed I would find such happiness." Frank brought her hand to his lips. "When I rode home that day and found you here, it was like something from a dream." He glanced at their children, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if there hadn't been that confusion about dates, if you'd arrived in June as I'd intended. Everything might have been different," Winnie acknowledged. "We might have been more formal with each other, less honest perhaps." She smiled at the memory of those early days, her determination to make herself useful in his house, his surprise at finding her already settled in. "The mix-up forced us to see each other as we truly were, without pretense. The best mistake I ever made, writing that date wrong," Frank agreed, pulling her closer against his side. As twilight deepened around them, William abandoned his fort building to climb into his father's lap. Maggie, not to be outdone, scrambled up beside her mother, while Tommy, still unsteady on his feet, made his way to them with determined steps. Gathered together on the porch of the home they had built both physically and emotionally, the Jackson family watched the first stars appear in the vast New Mexico sky. The path that had brought them together had been unexpected, but the destination, this life they had created, was everything they could have hoped for and more. From an empty house to a home filled with love and laughter, from strangers joined by a practical arrangement to partners bound by the deepest of connections. Frank and Winnie Jackson had found in each other not just the companionship they had sought, but a love story worth telling for generations to come.